Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Alta DeRoo. Alta is a member of our Executive MBA Class for 2022, and she is also a doctor. Alta and I recently connected to talk more about her background, how she decided to pursue an MBA, what led her to Darden, as well as how her time at Darden and her experience in the Executive MBA program helped her take on a senior leadership role in her organization, the Betty Ford Center. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here is my interview with Alta DeRoo. Alta, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brett.
Well, it's wonderful to have this time with you. You're still on the West Coast, right?
That's right. I'm in California.
Okay, so it's middle of the day for you. I'm sure a beautiful day out there.
It is mountains, clear skies, low humidity.
That's California.
I know.
Well, it's great to talk with you. How have you been? I cannot believe your class is about to graduate. It feels like just yesterday, y'all just started the program.
It did fly by. It did.
So how does it feel to be at this point?
So it feels good. We have one more week left, LR2. I'm looking forward to that. Almost like a final goodbye to some of my classmates along the way. I'm really looking forward to wrapping it up and being done with it. It's almost relaxing just thinking about the fact that we're almost there. Like it's soothing thinking about that.
I will tell you, you've probably already started to put this together, but the vibe of LR2, it's a low stress week. It's a victory lap week. We're here, we're going to graduate. We can see that right on the horizon. We're right there. It's such a fun time. It's so much fun. Victory
lap is probably the best way to put that. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about you, because we got a lot of ground to cover here. Once I heard about your new job, I was like, we got to get Alta on the podcast. Yeah. So I'm so excited to have you here and to talk about your story. So let's go back in time a little bit. Sure. What did you do before coming to Darden? Tell us about your background.
Yeah, so after undergrad, I went straight into the military and in the Navy, and I flew E-2C Hawkeyes as a naval flight officer. Did that for 8 years. The military sent me to medical school, and so I trained as a obstetrician gynecologist. Did that for probably the next 16, 18 years. And then while I was there in the military, I also became board certified in addiction medicine. And then after retiring from the military, I worked with the University of Virginia. That's how I came really to know Darden. And then it was approximately 2 years later where I applied for your program. Right as I got accepted to Darden, literally within a week, I was given this awesome job opportunity here in Southern California that has worked out well.
So tell us where you are right now.
So right now I'm at the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, California, which is just outside Palm Springs. And next month I will be in Minnesota, living just outside Minneapolis. I was promoted to Chief Medical Officer during my time at Darden. And so I'll be moving up to Minnesota with all of the other executives and where our flagship hospitals are.
So you got to go from Rancho Mirage, California to Minnesota.
Right.
Different clothing is required.
Right. Yes.
Well, that is a beautiful area of California. If people haven't been out there, it's deserts and mountains, and you're near Joshua Tree National Park out there.
Yeah, so I'm probably 30, 45 minutes from Joshua Tree. And, when it gets cold enough, we have snow-capped mountains when it's 80 degrees down at normal level. So it's really cool living here. Palm trees everywhere. Yeah, it's really
wind turbines, date farms.
We do have that. We are known for our date farms. You're absolutely. My house is on a former date farm place. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Alta, I want to go back a little bit in your story, because when I met you, when you were applying to school, you were really working at this intersection. It felt like of OBGYN and addiction, that there was an interesting nexus here that I didn't necessarily think about. You want to talk a little bit more about how you got interested in addiction?
Yeah. So I saw a lot of sailors and soldiers coming home from war, and a lot of them were had substance use disorders with both opioids and alcohol. Alcohol is something very socially acceptable within the military, and opioids are what we would have to treat pain. They would be our pain reliever of choice. So patients would come in, and during the time I was at the NIH in Walter Reed, and I was going through a fellowship for in vitro fertilization, and was discovering how much this drug use impacted the male side, and started learning more about the female side, starting getting involved in that recovery aspect. And then the military supported me to become board certified in addiction medicine. So it was extra training I did. And as I started treating more women with substance use disorders, then they want their husbands to be treated and their boyfriends to be treated, preferably not at the same time, husbands and boyfriends. So I found just this nice intersection where I could treat moms with substance use disorder and then hopefully break that cycle of then babies coming out and falling within that lifestyle of substances. So it has really carved out a niche, and was also one of the reasons that my current employer found me attractive too, was that, we have lots of physicians who practice addiction medicine, but rarely do we combine all parts of medicine. So I was able to combine OBGYN and addiction.
It feels like there's been so much conversation around addiction in the United States over the past few years, in particular, the opioid crisis, fentanyl, all of these kinds of things. That must keep you and your organization very busy, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in March, just last month, we had the highest number of admissions across all of our 16 sites that we've ever had in our 72-year history. So it is a real thing. We're seeing it here. Yeah.
What do you chalk that up to? I mean, this has always been part of American life. And, I'm just curious, you work so closely with this, but It also feels like the degree to which it has become problematic within our society is maybe even more pronounced.
So, during the pandemic, people were allowed to isolate. Well, we were told to isolate, right? We all stayed in our houses. And normally, if we were social drinkers, a lot of people would have the mitigating factors of going to a restaurant and a bar and it closing down at 10 p.m. or 2 o'clock in the morning. But now when people are in their house and having alcohol delivered, there's no governing factor to stop their use. So addiction loves isolation. And so when you have people starting to use again, maybe they're returning to use, they may have been in recovery. It was just a recipe that was just prime for those either recovering for substance use disorders or starting to have this alcohol use creep up on them. And then also, one of the things that governed us, our substance use, was that we wouldn't even think about going into the office hungover or drinking in the office. But if everything's virtual, there's nothing overseeing that. So now we're on hopefully the other side of this pandemic. People are starting to socialize more, spending time with family and friends that love them, taking a little notice of what's going on, and they're going back to work. And that's where we're seeing a lot of people raising their hands saying, I need help.
That's interesting. The pandemic aspect to this story, like the fact that people were isolated from their support networks. If they're working remotely typically. So again, another form of isolation, and just, I can imagine how that could create all sorts of problems for people.
Yeah. And Brett, it's everybody. It's physicians, it's executives, it's moms, dads. We're also seeing a lot of this in youth. So no longer do we think of the person with a substance use disorder as the person hanging out underneath the bridge with a trench coat on, right? So these are high functioning people that also have issues with substance use disorder. So it doesn't know any boundaries. The disease doesn't have any boundaries.
Well, you work at Betty Ford now, and I think of that as one of the name brand institutions in the world of addiction and substance abuse treatment. What was it like to move to that organization and do that work there?
Yeah. This is like the flagship. It was the original when we opened our doors in 1982, and Betty Ford, the first lady, came out and raised her hand and said, I've got a problem. normalized it for other folks who also had a substance use disorder, but it was like taboo back then. So coming into this organization, knowing that the mission that is here and it just is shared among all of the employees gave me goosebumps when I walked in, because everybody's here rowing in the same direction with one mission. You walk in our foyer and there are just busts and pictures of President Ford, Mrs. Ford. It's a special place, and we have a very large campus that's very tranquil, conducive to recovery. So honestly, the first time I drove up, I got goosebumps walking through the threshold.
Well, it sounds like it's been an incredible opportunity for you, and one that's continuing to grow and
Right.
evolve. And so we're going to get to that. But before we get there, I want to talk about how you decided to pursue an MBA. Because one of the interesting things about your class, Alta, I get this question from some of your classmates from time to time, is like, how in the world did we end up with this many doctors in one class? I mean, it's double digits for our listeners who don't know that something like maybe 12, 13, 14 doctors of medical professionals. It should also add nurse practitioners to that list.
Right.
So an incredible representation. And y'all, interestingly enough, were the class that applied during the early phase of the pandemic. So March 2020, you applied in the 2020 admission cycle. Now, I think you applied a bit before the pandemic was on our radar in the way that we'd come to know it. But still, it's interesting, the timing and confluence of all those things.
Yeah. I think mostly among doctors, I can just speak for my kind, is we've all the level that you see a lot of the physicians are in our class they're mid-career. And we've seen the writing on the wall that you can only do surgery and deliver so many babies after a while, and then you hit a ceiling. There's only so much that you can do with that skill from medical school. But if you want to go beyond that and really understand why your organization does certain things or why your hospital makes certain decisions, you have to get more education. And I found for me, an MBA was very applicable for that. It was probably the best decision that I could make to move higher. So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of MDs take that route. Is we thought medical school was going to be it, but that only carries you so far.
And one of the things that some of the doctors have shared with me is, they have managed a lot of people typically, but didn't ever really have any formal instruction or guidance in terms of how to manage, how to lead.
Right. Yeah, you bring up a good point. Physicians aren't that great at leading people. We may have gotten a couple pearls here and there, but going the traditional role, which was undergrad straight into medical school, you just don't have the opportunity to lead people. Now, I will say a lot of our class does have former military in it. And so we do have some military docs just like me. One thing that I would say is different about the leadership that I learned within the military and then the leadership that I learned through our courses in Darden is that it's a more sophisticated way of leading. It's a more mindful and more curious way of leading people instead of the leadership skills that were given to us in the military. Great skills, but when you get up into the C-suite and you're talking about business, then you go to a different tier of leadership. And so I think that was one of the nice things I brought away from my MBA.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit more about the impact of your degree as we start to get into your career story a little bit later. But I'm curious about, you mentioned having a connection to UVA Health. Mm-hmm. What about Darden in particular appealed to you, resonated with you as you were making your MBA decision?
So I was looking around for business schools. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get an MBA. And at the time when I was researching all of this, Darden was top 10. I actually applied to Darden. If you were to look back, if somebody were to look back on my history, I applied to it 2 times and then got scared and then said, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. This is too much. And so it was finally on the 3rd time where I actually completed the application and went forward with it. But I liked it because it was top 10 and I was in Virginia at the time. Heard really good things about it.
And you mentioned very soon after, okay, I'm going to do this, all of a sudden you have this major life change. And I remember that. I think you were curious, can you even do this from the West Coast? What does that look like? I mean, we do have students that do that, but not a huge number of students. So how did you think about the time commitment, what it was going to take for you to be an engaged member of the class?
Right. So the first thing I did was share it with my employer because I had to have their support. And they understood that getting my MBA was going to make me more valuable to them, right? And I'm a long haul in this company. I'm here for the rest of hopefully my professional career. And I was able to navigate it with the time change. The time change was advantageous at times. So there were times when we would have 8 a.m. electives that came Monday through Friday. So with me being on the West Coast, that was a little difficult. So class started at 5 a.m. was no big deal, just made it work. And then for the classes that were offered in the evening, if I remember correctly, some started at 7 or 7:30. And I was able to negotiate with my current employer, like, hey, on those days, can I have my work end early at like 4 p.m.? So then I would engage with class. And I was able to log on to class right from where you're seeing me now, right at my desk. So I could still be at work and seen as a leader, and then respond to any emergencies that happen because I'm in a hospital. But that's how I was able to make it work with the time change and West Coast.
And the traveling to Roslyn for this once a month weekend residency, was that okay?
That was tough. So traveling to Roslyn on the weekends was tough. I learned the airline routes very easily and tried to get as many direct flights that I could. Not always possible from the Palm Springs airport, but I made it work. And one thing I would say to other professionals who may be listening is that sometimes there's other professional obligations that I was able to meet while I was in DC with my current job and attending classes. So I was able to pair those together.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine Palm Springs to Dulles, maybe on occasion, not super frequently.
It would be Palm Springs to Phoenix to DCA, or Palm Springs to DFW to DCA.
So you've gotten to know some airports well.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, hopefully you've accrued some miles through all of this. Maybe you'll take a trip. Maybe you'll take a trip after the program. So, all right. So let's talk about, you come to Darden, right? You have this important conversation with your employer, and I think it's great for prospective students to hear that, because talk to your manager even before you begin the application process. For folks who are not going through that job transition, but get that buy-in early. Have those conversations early, because I also think it's a great opportunity not only to say, look, this is the value that I'm going to bring to the organization, but to also get a sense of maybe what might be available to you in the organization. If you had an MBA, what's possible for you there? Those are interesting exploratory conversations, I think, for students, and encourage people to have those conversations early, often help people understand their motivation to take this step. So you come to Darden, and you are, a brand new first year executive MBA student, balancing a lot, a new role, commuting from the West Coast. What was that like?
It was difficult. I would never sugarcoat it. It was difficult, but one of the reasons why I found it difficult is because when people come into business school, they're an overachiever on some sorts, right? You don't get slackers that end up at Darden. And so I was an overachiever in undergrad, in flight school, in medical school. And in my mind, I'm thinking I should be getting all A's. I should be getting all distinguished grades. And so that pressure that I was putting on myself to be number one and to be that A student turned out to not be necessary. I was still learning. I was still bringing it in. I was still applying the knowledge that I had at Darden to my current job, which is the whole point of it. But it was difficult for me because I was putting all this pressure on myself. I still learned tons, but I wasn't necessarily your A student, high performer stuff, because you have the challenges of work and family.
Yeah, you got to make choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's a priority for you? And I think what you just shared there is really important for our students to hear, because we see prospective students wrestle with this in a lot of different ways, right? When they're trying to figure out, can you do school, right? Oftentimes they're making themselves run this gauntlet of everything has to be, perfect and just so, and then you get into the program and you're in a room full of really talented people. You've got a lot of things competed for your time. You may not necessarily be able to be the student you think you should be, whatever that is, right, in a given quarter, in a given class, just because of the other things that are impinging upon your available time.
Yeah. It was almost like 6 months into the first year, I gave myself the space of forgiveness, where I quickly learned that there were people in my class who were brilliant, brilliant people. And I learned a lot from my classmates and my instructors, but I gave myself this space to say, okay, Alta, you don't have to be number one. Work and family are number one, and Darden is right there. And to be three in my life is pretty darn good. So, so that's where it's at. And, I did well, but the most important thing is that what I learned, even passively listening and engaging.
That's a great point. That sort of focus on the learning orientation rather than some particular grade outcome. I think that's also really important, because I think we become so conditioned in our educational experiences to judge the value of the educational experience oftentimes on how we did. Do we get an A? Do we do really well academically? It's a bit narrow. Giving yourself forgiveness, I think that can be hard for the kinds of people who are looking at programs like the Darden Executive MBA program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially for the moms out there too. The moms or the dads who have kids who you have to say, sorry, kids, I'm going to need a couple hours to attend this class, So it was, me and my family and I both experienced that.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about the family obligations that you were balancing as well as part of all of this, because I think it's important for people to hear, like, there's a lot of stakeholders in your life, and there's folks at work, but there's also really important people at home too.
So the perspective that I would be coming from is a single parent, and I have 11-year-old twins who are very aware of what's going on and how I'm spending my time and what I'm doing. And I explained to them, hey, mom's going back to school, just like you were in school now. And, we set aside time to study, and they understood. And they had, as 11-year-olds, they're getting to that age where they're like, well, why are you getting an MBA? And I loved explaining to them why I was getting it. I also love the fact that they saw mom studying and being able to balance work and them and school. So in that way, I was very much a role model for them, and I loved it. The way that I negotiated my time with that, though, is that I would often wake up very early, 5 a.m. or so, and get my reading done. And then when they wake up around 6:30 or 7, then I could be present for them. Or in the evening, I would carve out time for them and then read after they went to bed. So that's how I negotiated it as a single parent. I also involved them. I would tell them about the case studies. I would tell them about things, and believe it or not, they were interested, so it was cool. I involved them. I think that's how I got through it.
I think it's a really important point. There can be a thing that sometimes happens for students while you're doing something like an executive MBA program. Let's just talk specifically about the Darden program, where you can get so busy, you forget to share the experience with the other people who are supporting you. And that's not great. So it's cool that you involved them.
Yeah, it was really cool. I bought them little Darden t-shirts, and they love it.
So what do they think now that you're about to graduate?
They think it's pretty cool. I explained to them, the letters, what MBA mean, and what, how this is also going to put us at an advantage. That's why mommy's able to rise up in her job. And so they're very proud of me. And they've said it, and they're excited for graduation. And they're also excited for mommy to be back now, right? So now I don't have to, read books at night, specifically for my MBA. I can be there for them. So they're excited for that too.
Yeah, you'll get some time back in your schedule, to be sure. So I appreciate you're talking about that, because I think that's always on the minds of our parents, right? Particularly, as you mentioned, for the moms. When we talk with moms who are prospective students, they are really asking that question of, like, who is going to I'm going to go to school, and there's going to be this gap, and who's going to fill, what I currently do. It might be a partner, spouse, but you got to have those conversations. It's a really, really critical. And for single moms in particular, I think that's the dynamics of that decision different as well, because it's really you, and you got to figure out your support network. Were there people that you enlisted, or people that were helpful to you along the way?
Yeah. I found that when I shared with people that I was getting my MBA and that it was very challenging, you'd be surprised. A lot of people wanted to help out. A lot of people gave me the space or a little bit of leeway to miss an obligation here and there, or to drive my kids home from school once in a while if they needed it. And all I would have to say is, you know what, I have a weekend full of finals. Can you take the kids for 6 hours? But it's because I shared with them that I was getting my MBA. Now, if I had kept this a secret, then I probably wouldn't have so much generosity for my community. But yeah, I did. I mean, the other moms, I shared with them that I was going back to school, and a lot of them could really identify with that. So I would say, make it known that you're doing this, and you'll see a lot of people will just come out of the woodwork to support you.
That's a great point, Alta. One of the things, and somewhat related to asking and giving yourself forgiveness or that grace, it can also be hard for really motivated people to ask for help or to display that vulnerability. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a little tough. When, again, professionals, when we get to this stage in our life, it's because we are independent and we can do it all. But you really do have to give yourself that forgiveness and say, okay, I'm going to let this person come into my life, and I'm going to let them help me because I'm going to be a better person for this. And you strengthen these ties. People really do want to help you out, but it was tough to be weak in somebody else's eyes or to need that. But an MBA and going back to school is a pretty good reason to be weak and to raise your hand and say, hey, can you help me out a little,
Yeah, I should note for our listeners, there were air quotes around weak.
Yes, right. I am. Anybody who knows me knows that the last thing I am is weak. But in my mind, or other people who've gotten this type of mindset to be successful, I don't mean that sincerely.
Absolutely. No, I think it's important because so much of what causes students challenges is the difference, the gap between the perception of who you think you should be and the reality of perhaps who you need to be to get through the program and to move forward. And resolving that, I think, is really important work, particularly for people who want to take on larger roles, more responsibility in their career.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, all right. So you get to Darden, you're navigating being in business school and juggling all these things. You're at Betty Ford. And I started to get wind, I will say, here in the admissions office that you were interested in a new career opportunity with Betty Ford, that you were sort of looking at that. You want to talk a little bit more about your career journey after you started the program?
Right. So being the medical director here at the Betty Ford Center, I thought was going to be it. It was already this wonderful career opportunity. And I didn't think that there were many other opportunities beyond this. But then our chief medical officer, who is sort of like the head doctor for our whole organization, and we have 16 sites. So the head doctor for all of our sites, he was retiring, and it was a surprise. Nobody was expecting this retirement. Nothing bad happened to him. He just made this decision. And honestly, I was halfway through Darden, or shortly into my first year, and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm not prepared. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet to apply for CMO. And I actually didn't. So it was open for a while, and I just sat on my heads and didn't think that I was worthy at first. I was like, gosh, am I even worthy of this? I need to practice my MBA skills first. I need to be better at the job that I am. And after a while, when I read the job description and I dissected all the financials, which they give you, I found that I was actually going to be a pretty good candidate. And I was taking a class at the time called Speaking About Business, and the professor there actually helped me directly through the interview process, and that was key. I was actually able to take one of my classes that I was in Darden to help me with the interview process, and it went really well.
Well, let's take a moment to acknowledge that faculty member, June West, right?
June West, yeah, amazing. She was amazing. And when the class started, she asked us what we wanted to get out of that course. And I told her immediately, this is what's happening in my life, and this is how I'm going to directly apply this course. And it was wonderful. Then all of my assignments were geared then towards my next interview, which was a series of like 4 to 6 interviews.
Yeah, imagine there's a few interviews to become the chief medical officer of Betty Ford.
A lot, yeah.
So I want to come back to something you said as you were talking about, looking at this role and kind of thinking like, oh, I haven't had a chance I'm like halfway through my MBA. I haven't had a chance to practice my MBA skills. This maybe not feeling totally worthy of this role. How did you resolve that in your mind? Because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, particularly as they start to take on more responsibility, feeling like I'm not the person for this role, more often talking themselves out of it.
Right. Yeah. And I did. I talked myself out of it at the beginning of it. How I got past that was thinking that this is the eventual role that I wanted anyway. And I can learn how to do it, and I have the tools on how to do it, and I can ask people for help, and I don't have to enter the chief medical officer position as already knowing how to be a chief medical officer. I will admit one of the things that they found very attractive was that I was completing my MBA. So here they were hiring somebody that they knew had the tools and the inspiration to lead their organization. So that's how I got past it, was being comfortable with the fact that I don't have to know everything to apply and to start the job, that I can gain that knowledge. And I've been in the job now for about 4 or 5 months. And I'm learning tons about the job, and often looking back and saying, also, what were you thinking about? What do you mean you didn't think you could do this? Yeah. So a little bit of, I don't like to recognize imposter syndrome too much, but for a short period of time, I had it.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about your journey there, because it feels very authentic to me when I talk with people here on the podcast or in the program, or people going through the career process like you, just kind of trying to take that next step in their career and kind of wrestling with that. Mm-hmm. I can do this. I'm not the right person for this. I can do this. I'm not the back and forth. The other thing that has come up in the conversation I had with some of your classmates, some of the doctors, is they felt like the program changed how they show up in meetings, and and bear with me here, and I'm gonna parrot what they said. This is not necessarily my opinion, but it's something that I thought was really interesting. They said, as doctors, you're constantly asked to walk into a room and tell everybody what's going on, and like, this is the situation, this is what we should do. Like, that seems like that's almost incentivized in the profession. Mm-hmm. However, to be an effective leader, like a truly inclusive leader, you can't operate like that. And it's a little bit different.
Yeah, well, you really put your finger on something that I've learned too throughout this process. So medically, as a physician, you're absolutely right. Somebody comes to us and they say, Alta, tell me what we should do about when should this patient deliver? What is the best course of action? What are the prognosis? And you have to have an answer right there based on evidence, and this is how we're going to do it. But when you're walking into a boardroom, which I'm in now, it's more collaborative, and you learn about leadership styles, and you really have to take input from your chief nursing officer, input from your chief financial officer, marketing. So it's more of a collaborative rather than a directive type of leadership. And I think that's the threshold that you cross over going from medicine to rather, a different type of leader within the hospital.
And in the MBA, I can imagine is particularly helpful, because something you said previously about not needing to know everything, I think Darden, you're constantly reminded of that. Like,
oh yeah. Yeah. I was constantly reminded of things I didn't know. Yeah. So, right. And that's where that vulnerability comes in. And people like to see that. Your direct reports like to see that you don't show up knowing everything, and you do need their help. And that's where it does take this community within your organization, where you take input from everybody, and they respect the fact that you're asking for their input. They feel valued that way.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about speaking about business, because I can't tell you how many people I ran into at Sands Family Grounds who were in this class who were like, this is the greatest class I have taken. Yeah. And so can you tell us a little bit more about what this class is or was for you, and what you did?
Yeah. So it was with June West, who has a lot of experience in this area. And what she's taught us, or how it was designed, is that there are going to be situations where you have to address, either virtually or live, people that you need to influence or motivate. And what she does, she put us through these several exercises where we gave a talk on how we're going to do that. And it turns out that there are actually sequences that you can use. There are equations, there are solutions, like a motivated sequence that you can use when you're talking to your troops or your fellow, medical officers or something in the hospital. And so she would give us guidance on parts that we needed to hit to make our speaking effective. Then we were also critiqued by our classmates who are other professionals. So that's largely how the class went. One of the things that I really liked about it is that it was direct application. Finance, sure, and accounting has its place in your MBA, no doubt. But this is exactly what I needed now. I think one of the best classes that I had in there was how to talk virtually with people. So before, when you'd stand up and your presence on the stage is very different in the virtual world. And even as I'm talking to you here, I'm using those things that I brought away from the class, right? Where you appear a certain way in your camera. I'm using my hands, as a certain way so that I can get my point across, because I'm conscious of the fact that you can only see this much of me and I don't have the whole stage to walk around and influence people. So I felt it was directly applicable to what I was doing. And it gave you something that you just can't learn in books. You have to do it. You have to practically get up in front of people and be critiqued.
What was the biggest surprise for you as you started down that? I mean, I can guess at it, but I'm so curious about what, you get into this and what
probably
really.
My biggest surprise was that I thought I knew everything. I'm like, oh, this is going to be so easy, And I found that there were certain tics that I had that I'm really trying to work on. And I noticed how my speech gravitated towards a certain type of talking when I was with different people, and I'm trying to correct that. So my biggest surprise is that I thought I knew it all, and I didn't.
No, I think it's a great point. Particularly if we think we're really good at something, it's probably been a while. If we think we're really good at it, we might not have gotten as much feedback, as much critical feedback from folks, and so to be critiqued on something, you have to be open to it. Was that a challenge for you, or?
Yeah, well, what allowed me to be open to it is that the people in my class I had gotten familiar with already for a year and a half. So they weren't strangers who had an axe to grind. They were actually other doctors who were saying, you need to expand on this a little more, or talk about this a little more. Because as a physician, when I talk about a medical thing, I'm assuming everybody else knows. And there are times where I really need to use just plain language to do that. And so if it would have been strangers critiquing me, I probably I've been a little more closed. But because I developed relationships with the other people in our class, it actually just felt like friends talking and helping me out.
So Alta, when you look back you're at the point, I think it's fair to say here, you post Q10, you're moving towards LR2. I think you're at the point in the program where it's okay to look back and kind of size up, what's been the impact for you? I mean, you've made an incredible career transition, but what have you taken away from your time at Darden?
So a lot of the leadership principles that were beyond the military have really helped me in a corporate type of environment. So that's really helped me a lot. And then also having all of those Harvard Business Review articles to then go back and reflect upon when I'm trying to think about how I'm going to do a presentation. So that was one of the things that has really, been beneficial in my current job. The other part too is that when we're in a board meeting, I'm not running the spreadsheet and I'm not doing the Excel calculations, but I can comment on our EBITDA. I can comment on the NPV. I can comment on the customer lifetime value. Just last week, I was talking with our chief financial officer about our credit rating and Moody's and how everything looked with that. And it made me feel more confident when talking to people, gave me the credibility. And then not just the credibility, but I actually did know what we were talking about, where we needed to improve.
It does feel like the program, you're not going to become an expert in accounting or finance. That's not what the program is designed to do, but you will become fluent in all of these areas. And I think that's something that's really important, particularly for people who want to become leaders, which is much more of a generalist skill set.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, also, what would you share with someone who's thinking about Darden's Executive MBA program? What would you encourage them to think about?
If I could talk to the person who is much like me when I applied, and that is tried a couple times and stopped the process, sort of quit the process because I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. I didn't think I was going to be able to find the time. And in retrospect, I wish I had applied sooner. You will find the time. You don't have to be number one in your class. So if you're applying for the program, you're not going to have to be number one. Other people in the class understand that you have time commitments, and there is a little bit of forgiveness along the way. So don't think that just because you have a family or you have a new career or you're too busy, I wouldn't let those stand in the way. They're doable. There's ways to find time, and your classmates understand, and your teachers support you.
I really appreciate that. I think this is a time of year. I mean, we're recording this in May. We've got, well, I should say late April, right on the verge of May. We've got a May 10, June 10, June 25 deadline on the horizon. And typically when we're talking to people who are applying here in some of our later rounds, they're really wrestling with, like, can I do this?
Right.
And what we always share with people is, like, it's really hard to understand when you're going through this as a prospective student or as an applicant, but you'll just find a way through. Yeah. Like, that's how it works.
Right. And if I can put emphasis on, like, oh, yeah, well, sure, Alta, that's because you've had this and that. But honestly, Brett, when I did LR1 while packing up my house and driving across country to California, as soon as I got to California and we were in a hotel, I was online at 5 o'clock in the morning doing those. You find time. And then starting a new job, all during COVID, my kids on Zoom classrooms. Sounds like chaos, but it's doable. It's doable. And it's for 22 months of your life. And then you're golden. You know, if you could just hold your breath, stand on your head for 22 months, there is a way to do that. You can do this. I'm not a super person. You know, you could do this.
And it feels to me like students pick up momentum through the program. Like, where you start, yeah, there's some friction, there's some startup, like just trying to figure out how to make all this work. But at some point, it may not necessarily be smooth, but like, you've got some quarters behind you, you've completed some classes, you kind of maybe start to pick up a rhythm.
Right. You know, and one of the things that helped me too is that when I was having trouble understanding maybe hurdle rate or something like that, I went to my instructor and I just said, hey, listen, this is not my background. I'm an MD. I have no idea, but explain this to me in normal terms. And then they took this 30 minutes out when they were at their own home, you know, on my time schedule here on the Pacific Coast to help me with that. So showed that vulnerability, asked them what I needed to do to apply this to my current work situation. And that really eased a lot of my anxiety of, am I going to be able to do this?
Yeah, you do have a whole support network of folks. You got your classmates, you've got folks in your personal life. You also have incredible faculty, staff that really helps. I mean, it's an incredible group of people who work with the Executive MBA program. We can't say enough good things about the program, faculty, and staff. Just an awesome group, and I think the faculty have such respect for the students who are doing this, in that, like, man, you are fitting this into a very full life, a very full schedule, and they understand that the Executive MBA students are juggling a lot while they're doing the program. Totally. So last question here for you. What are you excited about when you look forward, you know, a few months, a year out in the future? What are you really excited about also?
Really, I'm honing my craft here, honing my leadership levels, leadership game, and bringing it to levels that I didn't have maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, being a more productive part of the other executives in my organization. So that's probably the biggest part. I also, this is a little glimpse into my life. I love being able, when I'm hearing the news or reading the Wall Street Journal, to know exactly what they're talking about. Like right now, we're having this incredible inflation and, you know, other economic measures. I'm looking forward to being able to say, I know exactly what they're talking about, and explaining it to somebody else or somebody in my company.
Yeah, that's one of the things in the program for students when they hit that moment. It's sometimes in the program, sometimes after the program, world event happens, financial thing happens. Somebody says, anybody know, what is this about? And they can absolutely explain it and do it in a way that's comprehensible. And they couldn't have done that before the program. It may seem small, but I think it's very empowering to people to be able to bring that perspective. So, well, Alta, such a pleasure. I'm so glad we finally got this schedule. I'm so happy for you. Congratulations on your new role. You know, one of the most fun things for your admissions folks here is to see people come from, you know, where they were before the program to where they are at this point, and just all the life and work and exciting things that happen during the 22 months of the program. It's incredible. So congratulations.
Thanks, Brett.
And that was my interview with Alta DeRoo, a member of our Executive MBA Class of 2022. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXECMBA at darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.